explanation as well. When I was early in my coaching days, I mean, obviously I cared. I wanted my athletes to improve and I was invested in everything. But I also wasn't overly attuned or sensitive to what is. I was going from a script. It was very authoritarian driven. Not that I wanted to be that way. It's just what I had grown up learning. And I was just going to be reciting what they needed to do. And if they didn't fit my model of movement, then they were wrong. And from an ecological perspective, and specifically utilizing constraints and manipulating them purposefully, which is a CLA, you actually are more engaged, and it's quite challenging because not everything you do is going to be perfect. I may manipulate a constraint or several constraints within a particular activity in order for those constraints to then act as information that then specifies affordances or opportunities for action. And those affordances are individual and frame dependent, meaning that what I perceive to be an affordance is very different than what my 1-year-old son perceives to be an affordance. So I'm not going to get too far gone before I make my final point, but I do want to revisit my son here in a second. But the reason why that's important is if I'm manipulating constraints and all of a sudden I'm seeing, let's call it mistakes that are being made, there may be a need for that because the individual is working through the learning process to become sensitive and attuned. But I also may need to be aware where I may need to manipulate another constraint. So you're actively engaged as a coach utilizing a constraints-led approach, which is underpinned by ecological dynamics and nonlinear pedagogy. But that's important because we do get this notion of it being, well, they're just hands off. And I'll pardon me very quickly. I'll make this short, I promise. So I actually asked that question to my supervisor, who was partly, let's call it, responsible for maybe that occurring, and that's Keith Davids. So one of the individuals that helped coin the term ecological dynamics back in 1994. I asked him that question at this year's Sport Movement Skill Conference of this past year, and he kind of like chuckled. He said, I kind of am partly responsible for that. It was needed at that time, though, because at that time it was so hands-on to be controlling that he wanted to have this stark contrast to kind of let it start to have some emergent nature to it. What he meant by it was that, not just stand back and let it whatever self-organize, because self-organization can be functional and non-functional. So we don't have to get into that too much, but yes, going back to the original point, you have to be sensitive to what is as a coach as well, because it's that performer-environment relationship, and that also involves the coach in it.